the webinar on the topic Mahatma Gandhi's Satyagraha and the Path to World Peace. My name is Andy Bayuni. I'm a journalist from the Jakarta Post, and today I have the honor and pleasure of sharing the webinar. Let me just give you a background to this event. Not many people know that tomorrow, October 2nd, is the International Day of Nonviolence. The United Nations has designated this day to mark the birthday of Mahatma Gandhi, arguably the most influential leader in the 20th century. He led India to its independence in 1947, but his influence, of course, went beyond India. His thoughts and values are his biggest legacy that has applicability in any part of the globe, anytime, even today in the 21st century. Two other iconic figures of the 20th century, the civil rights movement leader, Dr. Martin Luther King, and South Africa's Nelson Mandela, both say they were inspired by Gandhi's teachings. Now, Gandhi is famous for his concept Satyagraha, which is often translated, not correctly, as peaceful resistance. We will talk about this later. And ahimsa, which means nonviolence. The world today is so far removed from the peace that we all crave. We actually live in a precarious world marked by tensions between nations as well as within nations. The COVID-19 pandemic is compounding the multiple problems from poverty, growing inequalities, persecution, discrimination, and polarization. The world is teetering towards violence, conflicts, and God forbid, wars. It is therefore appropriate that we celebrate the 2nd of October, Gandhi's date of birth in 1869, not only by remembering his teachings and values, but more importantly, by finding ways of applying them. Gandhi did not so much envisage peace and justice, but he came up with a method of getting there. Many present-day leaders still believe that violence begets violence. Gandhi is telling us that it doesn't have to be. Through Satyagraha and Ahimsa, Gandhi shows us that we fight violence and injustice by peaceful means. For the next 80 minutes or so, we will be exploring on this topic, and we have a great lineup of speakers. But before that, let's watch a short video clip.
आप मुझे जंजीरों में जकड़ सकते हैं, यातना दे सकते हैं, इस शरीर को नष्ट कर सकते हैं, लेकिन आप कभी मेरे विचारों को कैद नहीं कर सकते।
I object to violence because when it appears to do good, the good is only temporary. The evil it does is permanent.
The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attribute of the strong.
The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others.
With a strong belief in your purpose, even an insignificant being can change the course of history.
I'm ready to die, but there is no purpose for which I'm ready to kill.
You are a product of your thoughts. What you think is what you become.
Happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony.
You must not lose faith in humanity. Humanity is like an ocean. If few drops in the ocean are dirty, the ocean does not become dirty.
It's the 150th birth anniversary of the Mahatma. Let's keep his thoughts alive.
Well, in case you don't know, those were Bollywood stars, and it's good to see the young generation represented by the best in Bollywood to acknowledge and to revere Mahatma Gandhi. Before we begin the panel, I would like to invite His Excellency Pradeep Kumar Rawat, the Ambassador of India to Indonesia, to give his keynote address. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pa Andy Bayuni. Pa Andy is a respected name in journalism, not only in Indonesia, but also globally. Papa Yaya Khalil Stakuf, Secretary General of Nadatul Ulama Supreme Council, Dr. Hilal Ahmed, and Ibu Dolorasa Sinaga. I thank Jakarta Post for giving me this honor and privilege to be part of such a distinguished panel of scholars and artists. October 2 is also marked as the International Day of Nonviolence under the United Nations General Assembly Resolution of 15 June 2007, which was co-sponsored by 140 countries. The resolution said that this day is an occasion to disseminate the message of nonviolence, including through education and public awareness. It reflected the desire of the global community to secure a culture of peace, tolerance, understanding, and nonviolence based on the universal relevance of the principle of nonviolence. The idea of 2-year-long 150th anniversary commemoration, which will conclude tomorrow, was to highlight the vast nature of Gandhian philosophy and its applicability to diverse aspects of life. Writing in New York Times on October 2, 2019, Prime Minister Modi said, quote, "In Gandhi, we have the best teacher to guide us from uniting those who believe in humanity to furthering sustainable development and ensuring economic self-reliance. Gandhi offers solutions to every problem," unquote. When we are faced with the pandemic, one can hear critical comments on authorities for not providing what public feels is their right to get. Authorities are critical of masses that they are not fulfilling their duties, such as wearing masks, etc. If we follow Gandhi's advice that the true source of rights is duty, if we all discharge our duties, rights will not be far to seek. We could avoid such discourse completely. Therefore, the theme and timing of webinar is very apt. The world today is in a turmoil. Over 1 million precious human lives have been lost and countless lives made miserable due to a pandemic, which is, if one is to go by the available information, might have been a result of violence perpetrated by humans in one part of the world on some other creatures of animal world. One can argue that if the mankind was to follow Gandhian principle of ahimsa or non-violence, which is a wider principle and includes non-violence by man on nature, the planet Mother Earth could have avoided man-created disasters such as the pandemic that we all are going through. Peace and conflict are often used as twinned words. Elimination of one results in the other. Conflict and competition share a close relationship. Competition, which in its negative connotation degenerates into conflict, is inherent in evolution process. All beings compete to better themselves. Competition, like we are now seeing for developing a vaccine to control the pandemic, is good. It could benefit many, but this competition could easily turn into conflict if the outcome is used only to benefit a few. In the context of present pandemic, Prime Minister Modi unambiguously announced recently at the United Nations General Assembly that, quote, "As the largest vaccine producing country of the world, I want to give one more assurance to the global community today. India's vaccine production and delivery capacity will be used to help all humanity in fighting this crisis," unquote. This commitment is based on India's abiding civilizational faith in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, world is but one family. Peace and violence do not go together. Satyagraha is therefore already skewed in favor of peace, as core of Satyagraha is truth, non-violence, and sacrifice. It also brings into question, can violence be used to bring peace? It is akin to asking, can means be justified? by ends that they achieve. For Gandhiji, means were as important as the ends. Gandhiji refused to use arms or violence to achieve Indian independence. For him, violence will beget more violence and will breed hatred, consuming human spirit. He famously said, "An eye for an eye will make the whole world blind." For Gandhiji, as God's creation, there was some truth inherent in every creation. Hence, he saw some truth in each argument in a discussion which related to certain viewpoint. If one follows this premise, it becomes easy to understand diverse viewpoints without getting angry and violent. As we all know, it is the beginning of any conflict resolution and thus start of any peace initiative. Gandhiji saw innate goodness in all human beings as all are creations of God. For him, there was a contradiction if one was to classify one creation of God as good and the other as bad. He therefore said that hate the evil and not the evildoer. If one is to follow these, it becomes easier to engage in dialogue with anyone, another important requirement for peacemaking. Now, let me spend some time on the second part of my speech, how our two countries and peoples can employ Gandhian principles to make joint contributions towards world peace. To me, answer is simple and obvious. I came to this wonderful country for the first time in my life in September 2017 as ambassador. My immediate impression was being in a very familiar place like home. I often use the term cultural twins to describe our two countries. Indonesia, like India, is deeply spiritual. It has its own way of Islam, Hinduism, and other religious traditions. Indonesia successfully avoided falling into the trap of divisive ideology based on religion that led to traumatic partition of India in two countries. It rejected the destructive idea that different religions cannot coexist as equals within one country. India also rejected that destructive ideology even in its partition. As a result, India is multicultural, multilingual, with phenomenal diversity, something that Indonesia is also proud under its founding ideology of Panchashila provided by Bapa Sukarno. I was also impressed with the clear distinction that people in Indonesia made between culture and religion. The Javanese language not having harsh words or negative is yet another positive aspect. Though I must admit that initially it did create some difficulties for me. I would have preferred my Indonesian friends telling me "tidak bisa" rather than saying "belum." Would have made life much easier. Intuitively, Gandhian principles are built into the fabric of Indonesia. The tradition of Mushawara has Gandhian idea of conflict resolution or peace building inherent in it. While I was researching for material, I was surprised to find a reference to Muhammad Hatta, one of the founding fathers of Indonesia, as Gandhi of Java. India and Indonesia are the two largest democracies in Asia. We have the global diversity within our own countries. Our experience of managing various competing impulses in a positive sum manner is a valuable resource for nudging our region and the world in the direction of a global village, or the world is a family. Our two countries also follow the economic principles promoted by Gandhiji, which prioritize welfare of many. In political arena, our democratic credentials and respect for rule of law are well established. By having greater consultations among thought leaders of our two countries, we could combine our strengths to convincingly and concretely promote the forces of peace, sharing, and coexistence, and dissipate negative energies of conflict, hate, radicalism, and violence. We can once again take the cause of non-violence as, in the words of Gandhiji, non-violence is the greatest force at the disposal of mankind. Therefore, our nation-building experiences could be critical for efforts to develop Indo-Pacific architecture for peace and development. If this architecture is based on our experiences, it would naturally be democratic, rules-based, will have respect for diversity, and will be inclusive. I would conclude by invoking Gandhiji, who called upon each one of us to make our own contribution and not wait for others to do it for us. Gandhiji had brought change, but he also awakened the inner strength of people so they could bring the change themselves. So let us follow Gandhiji and be the change that you wish to see in the world. Thank you. Namaskar. Terima kasih banyak.
Thank you, Ambassador Rawat. Thank you for mentioning Muhammad Hatta's a friend of Mahatma Gandhi. I'm also, I came across an article by Sukarno in the book Di Bawah Bendera Revolusi, where he actually made reference to Mahatma Gandhi's teaching, Satyagraha and Ahimsa. And Sukarno wrote that it's not for Indonesia. And Indonesia's independence struggle was carried out physically at the time. Maybe history would have been different if we had taken the course, but it's something we cannot change. Now, when Gandhi was assassinated in January 1948, it was only a few months after India gained its independence. It was a sad news around the world. Let's watch a short video clip where the leaders at the United Nations paid tribute to the great man.
On Friday, the 30th of January, 1948, the flag of the United Nations stood at half-mast. For in India, Mahatma Gandhi was dead, assassinated. The United Nations representatives assembled to honor a man, not an official head of a state, not a general or a king, but a simple man, who without army, riches, physical magnificence, or worldly brilliance, has been called the most powerful man of the 20th century. And so the representatives of all nations spoke of him. For the United States, Warren Austin.
It is fitting that we who sit here charged with the grave responsibility of maintaining peace among nations should pay tribute to this great Indian leader who over the years has done so much to bring home to his fellow countrymen the moral and spiritual lessons which are essential for the achievement of world peace and brotherhood.
For China, Dr. Xiang.
In recent decades, no other man typified the wisdom and the nobility of the old continent so well as Mahatma Gandhi.
De la Tournelle for France. Gandhi, he said, Gandhi was the man who brought the principles of nonviolence into the political world. For Pakistan, Sir Mohammad Safrullah Khan.
His tragic death constitutes as grievous a loss to Pakistan as it is to India.
Philip Noel Baker for the United Kingdom.
He was the man who said that faith transcends reason, that God has his footstool where live the poorest and the loneliest and the lost. But our conviction that Gandhi has not lived and has not died in vain.
And finally, for India itself, Mr. Gopalaswamy Iyengar.
Our hearts are filled with an unspeakable grief. A great tragedy has overtaken us. the greatest perhaps in Indian history in recent years. As a matter of fact, we have lost our biggest man. If I may venture to say so, the world has lost its tallest man judged by all moral standards.
And so the nations bowed their heads before the memory of all that had been and was represented by Mahatma Gandhi. And Lead Kindly Light, Gandhi's favorite hymn, was sung. And all over the world, hundreds of millions wept because he was gone. Was he then, this man, that all the world should mourn him? A physically slight man, 5 feet 5 inches tall, who wore a homespun cotton loincloth like the poorest of the Indians, sometimes weighing less than 100 pounds. A man who died possessing only sandals, a pen, a book, and a dollar watch. Who spoke simply, with no attempt to hypnotize.
Nobody will say in English, powerful. Only one word. He can't reproduce the same thing twice. If he does, then it becomes a feat of memory, but not a thing coming out of the deepest recesses of his soul.
A man who led an army of some 400 million to victory without raising a gun. A man without the power of wealth or bombs or guns or physical glory. What then was his power? The clues lie in his life. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was born in Porbandar, October 2nd, 1869, a small state in western India. As it takes many rivers flowing together to make a sea, so many rivers flow together to make a great man. There is the time in which he is born. There is the place, there is the fact, there is the country and its traditions which form him. For a great man must not only come to life, there must also be a people to accept him. Here then was the house where Gandhi began his life. And the country was India.
Okay, now let's turn to the panel. Audience can ask questions at any time using the Q&A feature at the bottom center of your Zoom screen. We will select several questions from the audience after all the panelists speak. Do not hesitate to ask in bahasa Indonesia. Kalau Anda lebih nyaman bertanya dalam bahasa Indonesia, silahkan, dan kami akan menerjemahkannya untuk dijawab oleh para pembicara. Now, we have 3 distinguished speakers with us to talk about Gandhi's legacy and how they are still very relevant today. First, we have with us Professor Hilal Ahmed in New Delhi. Professor Hilal is an author and associate professor at the Center for the Study of Developing Societies in New Delhi. He has written extensively on Gandhi's legacy and contributed a chapter to the book Gandhi in Contemporary Times, published last year to mark the 150th anniversary of Gandhi's birthday. Professor Hilal's chapter was titled Gandhi's Imaginations of Muslim. With us today, Professor Hilal will talk about Satyagraha and its relevance in the 21st century. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ambassador Pradeep Kumar Rawatji, my fellow panelist, Andy, my friends in Indonesia, India, Namaste and Assalamu Alaikum. I greet you in these two to underline the diversity we have in our country, India, and the diversity you have in your country, Indonesia. And it is also appropriate because we are celebrating 150th birth anniversary of a person which we called Mahatma, or the great soul, Mahatma Gandhi. What I am going to do today is to talk about a concept which is often used by Mahatma Gandhi, and now we all use it. It is called Satyagraha. And for that, I have prepared a PowerPoint, not merely to tell you what his thoughts were, but also to visualize it, to make it simple, so that we could have some informed discussion about this concept of Satyagraha. But before I start, I would like to make a few clarifications. The first clarification is that I am a researcher, and this is my duty to be contextually appropriate. So whatever quotes which I'm going to show you, I have also provided the reference to that. So it will give you, if you want more research, if you want more information about that, you can certainly go there and then search or draw your own meaning of these sources. The second clarification is about my interpretation. These are my questions, these are my sources, and the interpretation I provide is entirely mine. So it is subject to multiple interpretations, criticism. So feel free to draw your own meaning. And as I said, that it is very difficult to cage Gandhi in certain framework. So this is my framework, not Gandhi's framework. This is very important to remember. So now I'm going to share my PowerPoint. Just bear with me. So the title of my presentation is Gandhi Satyagraha and its relevance in the 21st century. Gandhi is something which is an enigma. It is an enigma for a few reasons. So I would like to show you a few things about him. As you just saw in the clip, that Gandhi was not a political figure, not a head of the state, he was not a prime minister, he was not a president. Yet, he is regarded as the father of nation in India. So, does it make him puzzling? Because if you look at our currency notes, you will find the picture of Mahatma Gandhi. So, he was not a political, he was not a head of the state, yet he was father of the nation. Now, similarly, he was not the member of the assembly that drafted our constitution. Yet, his statue in the Indian parliament has a unique symbolic status. Remember, this is the statue on your right side, which is there in the parliament. And this place is always regarded as the most significant place in the parliamentary history of India. So, again, it is a bit puzzling. He was not at all related to the constitution, but at the same time, he is the person who was always evoked to protect or to assert constitutional values. Now, something about his religion. He never gave up his adherence to Hinduism, and he always called himself a practicing Hindu. Yet, he is treated as the most secular and respected political figure by all religion. So you can see that he is coming out from a very famous shrine in India. It is Qutbuddin Bakhtiar Kaki's shrine, where he visited just one day before his death. So again, a practicing Hindu who would always say with proud that I am Hindu, and he would make comment on Islam and also on Muslims with full authority, is something which makes us thinking who that person was. Now, finally, his political legacy. He, as Indy pointed out, that he passed away, he was assassinated just after 5 months of independence. And look at these two campaigns, one by the previous government, which is called Manrega, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Scheme, and one by the present government, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. These are actually presented to us in the name of Gandhi. So the political legacy is still continuing, and his ideas still influence Indian political discourse. So again, a puzzle. This person who died 70 odd years ago still is very powerful in Indian politics. Now, what to, in my view, make him relevant? What does it mean? Gandhi continued to survive as a metaphor of politics even after 7 decades of his death. And Gandhi's writing, as well as the stories of his political experiment, continue to inspire generations of people across the world. So what makes him relevant? There are many things, and Honorable Ambassador has indicated a few very powerful concepts in his writing. But I think the idea of Satyagraha is something which we must talk about, primarily because its applicability in different contexts, and even now, after 7 decades of his death. But Gandhi, as I said, again, is an enigmatic figure. The question is how to make sense of Gandhi and his Satyagraha. And this is a complex question. This is not a simple question. Why? Because unlike others, Gandhi would say that he celebrates inconsistencies. What does it mean? In an article written in Harijan in May 1933, Gandhi said, and I quote, "I would like to say to the reader that I am not at all concerned appearing to be consistent. Therefore, whenever anybody finds any inconsistency between any two of my writing, do well select the latter on the same subject." What does it mean? It means that he is providing a clue to us to interpret him in his own context. So, unlike other authors, Gandhi is providing us a tool to make sense of himself. This is a very difficult task, by the way, for all of us. Now, the second message is equally problematic. He said that my writings should be cremated with my body. What I have done will endure, not what I have said and written. So the emphasis on practice. So one, he would be very inconsistent. And second, his practices are more important than his writing. So what to do? So my way out is simply this. First is, I would like to read the Gandhi would like to be read. Meaning, I will follow his trajectory. Second, reading Gandhi through praxis, meaning I would recognize his writing as an act or practice, because writing is also a practice. And thirdly, I would deviate from him. And as a reader, I would try to trace a coherence in his different inconsistencies. So these three things, in my view, would provide a vantage point to understand what is Satyagraha. But before I talk about Satyagraha, I would like to begin with a story. And this story is Gandhi himself given to us. He said, because the term Satyagraha as a movement began in South Africa in early 20th century. So when the movement became very powerful, it became very important to name it. Initially, Gandhi described the movement as passive resistance. But after some time, as you can see on your screen, he became quite unhappy with this because of two reasons. One is that it was an English name, and second, that some new principles were evolving. Okay, so therefore, he thought a very interesting way out to solve this problem. And what was his way out? He was publishing a newspaper called Indian Opinion, and he invited the readers to propose an Indian or the indigenous name to design or to designate this struggle. One of his relatives who won this prize, his name was Magan Lal Gandhi, who came out with a suggestion So he came out with a suggestion that the word Satyagraha, meaning firmness in a good cause, must be used for the movement. Gandhi said, I like the word, but it did not fully represent the whole idea I wished it to connotate, and therefore he changed it to Satyagraha. So as I said, that this you may find in Satyagraha in South Africa. But what is the meaning of Satyagraha? According to Gandhi, Satya means truth, implies love and firmness, engendered and therefore serves as a synonym for force. He said, I thus begin to call the Indian movement Satyagraha, that is to say, the force which is born of truth and love or non-violence, and give up the use of phrase passive resistance. So I think it is very important for all of us to recognize that we cannot actually use passive resistance and Satyagraha interchangeably. Satyagraha has got a very specific meaning which is given to us by Gandhi. So in order to simplify that, let me show you this clip, this slide, in which I'm talking about what is not Satyagraha and what is Satyagraha. So there are 4 different ways in which we can make this distinction. First is Satyagraha is not a strategic move taken by a political group to achieve a larger objective. Gandhi would say that Satyagraha is an individual quest for exploring something called internal truth. Secondly, Satyagraha is not a passive resistance or a weapon of the weak. Gandhi would say Satyagraha is the weapon of the strongest and exclude the use of violence in any shape or form. Satyagraha, according to Gandhi, is not brute force. Rather, it is the soul force or love force. And finally, Satyagraha is not irreligious. Gandhi would say Satyagraha is always a belief in truth, and truth is God. Here it is very important to clarify that it does not mean that Gandhi won't say anything on atheist. He would say that an atheist is also a religious person because he or she is also believing in something called truth, and truth is God. This is what Gandhi said. Now, what are the features of Satyagraha? In my view, there are 3 features of Satyagraha. The first is that it is an internal quest. Gandhi said, the very nature of Satyagraha is that the fruit of the movement is contained in the movement itself. Satyagraha is based on self-help, self-sacrifice, and faith in God. The second feature is universal applicability. Gandhi says, Satyagraha may be offered against one's parent, against wife or one's children, against ruler, against fellow citizen, even against the whole world. Such a universal force necessarily makes no distinction between kinsman and stranger. Love does not burn other, it burns itself. Therefore, a Satyagrahi will joyfully suffer even unto the death. The third and the final feature of Satyagraha is the love force and the nature of opponent. Gandhi makes a very crucial distinction between evil and evildoer. He says, a Satyagrahi must not harbor ill will or bitterness against the latter. He may not even employ needless offensive language against the evil person, however unrevealed his evil might be. But what are the conditions for a Satyagraha? In my view, there are 5 conditions, and as I said, that these are my interpretation of Gandhi's Satyagraha. Remember, Gandhi has written extensively. There are at least more than 100 thick volumes of collected works. So what I have tried to develop a theory of Satyagraha on the basis of my reading. Remember, this is my reading of Satyagraha. So the first condition for Satyagraha, according to Gandhi, is Satyagraha must be used in the last instance, meaning that Satyagraha is never adopted abruptly and never till all other and milder method have been tried. For instance, if you are uncomfortable with something, you have to pursue the ruling power or the person or an institution or a collective with whom you feel that something is unjust. You have to pursue them. You have to compromise with them. You have to do a number of things. But suppose if all that fails, then you have to go for Satyagraha. So Satyagraha as a method must be applied in the last instance. Second is that Satyagraha meaning self-realization. A person, I quote Gandhi here, a person who claims to be a Satyagrahi always try by close and prayerful self-introspection and self-analysis to find out whether he is himself completely free from the taint of anger, ill will, and such other human infirmities, whether he is not himself capable of those very evils against which he is out to lead a crusade. So you have to ask yourself, are you doing the right thing or not? In some other place, Gandhi says that the truth is an inner voice, will come to you naturally, and it is a voice which will be an effect as a general will of the society. Now, the third condition is the social purpose. Gandhi says Satyagraha cannot be restored to for personal gain, but only for the good of others. A Satyagraha should always be ready to undergo suffering and pecuniary loss. So you cannot start a Satyagraha only for your own personal individual benefits or individual purposes. The fourth thing is, which is very crucial, a Satyagrahi must first mobilize public opinion against the evil which he is out to eradicate by means of a wide and intensive agitation. When public opinion is sufficiently roused against a social abuse, even the tallest will not dare to practice or openly to lend support to it. An awakened and intelligent public opinion is the most potent weapon of a Satyagrahi, unquote. It means that it is a collective effort. Satyagraha is a collective effort. It should not be an individual one. And it is for the larger public good, not for the individual gain. But for that, you have to create a public opinion. And that public opinion will create some kind of a pressure on your opponent. Now, the final point or the final condition for Satyagraha is social ostracism. Gandhi says that when a person supports a social evil in total disregard of a unanimous public opinion, it indicates a clear justification for his social ostracism. It means that the society must boycott that person, individual, or group, because that is against the collective will. That, remember, this is not majoritarianism. It is a collective rational will of the society, which is cultivated through public opinion and which is a part of the self-realization of a Satyagrahi, meaning it is a complex relationship between a person who is leading a Satyagraha as well as other participant of the society. And your opponent is also part of yours. You are not opposing the person for the sake of opposition. You are opposing the act which is bad, but your purpose is to convince your opponent through Satyagraha. So the boycott should not be a physical harm to the person, but a boycott of the act so that one can be pressurized to give up that very act and the very processes. Now, what we do, this is the final part of my presentation. I'm sorry, I'm very quick because I have just 15 minutes to wrap up this. Why do we need Satyagraha as a method in the 21st century? And here I would like to underline two problems, two global problems, which I feel we must talk about. The first problem is moral decline. In my view, the moral decline of society is one of the serious global problems which we encounter. And I find three facets of this decline. First of all, we have lost interest in redefining what is right and what is wrong for our collective existence as a global society. So the distinction between right and wrong has completely gone, and we do not have any interest in that. That's the first sign of moral decline. The second sign of moral decline is our society has become a collective of selfish individuals. We are not concerned about the social process that divide people, communities, and nation. We are so selfish that we just talk about ourselves. And the final thing, final indication of this moral decline is that we have a highly fragmented notion of social reform and change. Every segment of society wants freedom and recognition without and that freedom, and they do not consider the fact that freedom of one depends on freedom of all. So that's the moral decline, the first serious global problem, which in my view is that the moral decline of our global society. The second is the crisis of ideas. This crisis is about the human capacity to imagine the possibility of a good society. Again, I find three facets of this. First of all, we are often told that we must live in the present moment, letting go of the past and do not wait for the future. This presentism creates a number of problems for all of us. And that leads to the second problem. We avoid dreams and we hesitate to dream of a good society. And finally, eventually, this restriction this has somehow restricted the possibility to think about the practical ways to achieve our dreams. So therefore, in my view, we should have some kind of a satyagraha. And I call it a satyagraha for moral and intellectual emancipation. So I am going to use my interpretation of the theory of Satyagraha and try to use it to respond to the two issues which I have identified here: the moral decline and crisis of ideas. First of all, we must ask this question: do we need Satyagraha of this kind now, meaning the timing is appropriate or not? Gandhi has already said that Satyagraha should be used in the last instance. And in my view, yes, of course, we have to start a Satyagraha for human emancipation, because in a post-ideological world, there is no discussion on collective human emancipation. So there is a need to actually begin a Satyagraha of ideas. The second thing is, do we really need to internalize it? And if we internalize this, who is our opponent? Obviously, we are going to do a Satyagraha of ideas, then who is our opponent? I think Gandhi would say that you must realize that a person is not important, but the process is. And therefore, my answer is that we have to begin at individual level and identify the processes that prevent us to think about collective human emancipation. The third point is about leadership. People often ask, is it not a task of an academic or a political leader to lead a Satyagraha? After all, Gandhi would say that there should be some social purpose of it. Is a collective exercise. My answer is no. It is our collective responsibility to think collectively about the future of our society. And this collective thinking, I would argue, contribute to the work of intellectuals and politicians. So we should not leave everything for politicians or intellectuals. We must start thinking, we must start dreaming of having a good society. Now, the second stage of this Satyagraha could be called mobilization. The obvious question is, what is to be done? Gandhi's criteria is simple: create public opinion. And in my view, it is possible. It is very easy to mobilize public opinion for discussing ideas of collective human emancipation in the age of social media. You have to just start raising this question, and people would certainly respond to you. Now, finally, the boycott question, or the action question: what should be the next? I think it all depends on the first four stages. Once we cross the first stage, then it will be possible to think of the ways in which we can respond to the challenges that are actually stopping us to think of the idea of good society. So in my view, a Satyagraha of ideas for the purpose of moral and intellectual emancipation is very important. And we must remember that we need not to set a goal to reach somewhere. It is a movement. Remember the quote Gandhi, I just highlighted, that the movement itself is something which would produce, the goal is to realize that this is my responsibility to think positively and think about a society which cares for others. So I stop here, and if you want question, I would be happy to respond to you. Thank you very much.
Sorry. Thank you, Professor Hila. It was very informative, a very good presentation about Satyagraha, about the problems and applying in the 21st century. I'm interested maybe later during the Q&A about the use of mobilizing of public opinion in the era of the social media, at a time when the social media is being weaponized to promote hate and violence. Would be interesting to hear your take on that later on. Before we move to the second panelist, let's hear our third and last video clip, this one with Prime Minister Modi paying tribute to Mahatma Gandhi.
गांधी जी भारतीय थे,
Gandhiji was an Indian,
लेकिन
but
सिर्फ भारत के नहीं थे.
he didn't belong only to India.
आज ये मंच
This event today
इसका जीवंत
is
उदाहरण है.
a living example of this.
इतिहास में ऐसा
We
कहीं
have
देखने को
never
नहीं
seen
मिलता
this
है
in history before.
कि जब किसी व्यक्ति
A person
शासन से
who had not
दूर
even
दूर
the
तक संबंध नहीं हो
remotest connection with the government,
और वो
but
सत्य और अहिंसा की
who is
शक्ति से
able with the power of truth
सदियों पुराने
and
साम्राज्य को
non-violence not only
न सिर्फ
to
जगजोर
shake
दे
up a centuries-old
बल्कि
empire,
अनेक देशों
but
में भी
also to ignite
आजादी की ललक जगा
the
दे.
yearning for independence among so
महात्मा
many
गांधी
in so many countries.
ऐसे ही
Mahatma
व्यक्ति
Gandhi
थे
was such a person.
Okay, we seem to be having some technical problem. Let's move on. Therefore, our second panelist is Kiai Yahya Khalil Stakuf. He is the General Secretary of the Nahdlatul Ulama Supreme Council, and he is speaking to us all the way from Rembang in East Java. Time magazine has hailed Pak Kiai among Indonesia's most influential Islamic leaders. He's a distinguished Muslim scholar and the co-founder of a global movement called Humanitarian Islam, which seeks to reform obsolete tenets of Islamic orthodoxy that enjoin religious hatred, supremacy, and violence by restoring rahmah, so universal love and compassion, to its rightful place as the primary message of Islam. I could go on, but I think you got the message. Kiai Yahya is a man of peace. Kiai Yahya will talk about the applicability of Gandhi's teachings in Indonesia. Kiai, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Your Excellency Ambassador Rawat, Pak Andy, Ibu Dolorosa Sinaga, Dr. Hilal Ahmed, and ladies and gentlemen, the participants of this webinar. First, I have to say that I don't have much first-hand knowledge about Gandhi. I mean, I did not read much about Gandhi by myself, but I am blessed with an opportunity to be a disciple of another great man, which is President Abdurrahman Wahid. We call him Gustur here, famous as Gustur. And Gustur claimed to be a follower of Gandhi. He claimed that he took Gandhi as his role model. To me, this is very, very fascinating because Gustur was an advanced Muslim scholar. He mastered everything about Islamic discourse, all the disciplines, the branches, almost everything, from the jurisprudence to Sufism. If he wanted to grab an understanding about the deep philosophy and wisdom of life and existence, I think he would have sufficient references from the Islamic discourse. Yet, he chose to take Gandhi as his role model. To me, this is very fascinating. And from witnessing what Gustur did, you see, it was told that the way of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, behave is totally a total reflection of the Quran. So people in his time, if they wanted to understand Quran, they didn't have to read Quran. Just by staying around the Prophet, they will understand what the Quran is about. So this is the way that I mostly get my knowledge about Gandhi by witnessing my master, Kustur. Kustur claimed Gandhi to be his role model, and he claimed to be upholding Satyagraha as his primary source of philosophy in his struggle. And I think we can notice that Kustur and Gandhi both resemble a very unique quality of leadership in the society. They, also just now, Dr. Ahmed mentioned that Gandhi was not a state leader, a president or a prime minister, not a parliamentarian, not an official political leader. But it is obvious that Gandhi functioned greatly in moving political dynamics, historical political dynamics in his time. So he was actually a political leader. So was Kustur. He was a political leader. But they were both more than just political leader, because at the same time, they also provided examples and guidance for a spiritual understandings, a profound spiritual understanding. Gandhi and Kustur both, while they led their people toward political emancipation, they also provided guidance for their people toward spiritual enlightenment. We find not many of this quality among leaders throughout history. Now, what I understand from witnessing Kustur about Satyagraha is that it is a principle, a fundamental principle to uphold the truth. Because also Dr. Ahmed quoted that Gandhi himself meant Satyagraha as a firmness for the truth. So that was the very fundamental principle that Kustur was upholding throughout his struggle. He upheld the truth. He bears the truth no matter what. Stick on the truth at all cost. So, and truth is not just about what is factual. It's also about what is morally right. So stick to what is right and not compromise, And both Kustur and Gandhi were prepared to take any consequences of upholding the truth. Gandhi was assassinated, but I believe he didn't mind. He didn't mind being assassinated. Kustur was ousted from presidency, and I know for a fact he didn't mind being ousted from presidency, because they simply firmly uphold the truth at all cost. That was the most fundamental principle, moral principle of their struggle, I believe. Now, what they did was, Gandhi and Kustur were also both very complicated as persons and also as discourse. Dr. Ahmed even referred Gandhi as an enigma. So they were very complex, but I want to point out one very important element of their struggle, which is reconciliation. You know, before figuring out what we should do to maintain peace among us, we need to reconciliate the existing animosity among us. You know, I would believe that Gandhi was aware about the bitter history of India, not just between the Indian people and the British as the colonial ruler, but also, for example, between the Hindus and the Muslim. There was a bitter history there. But one thing that Gandhi struggled the most, I believe, was to reconcile the people. And that's why Gandhi were talking so much about how to treat human being as human being, treat others as human being, to have empathy toward others, to understand others, and to forgive. This is Kuster actually followed Gandhi in this term when he had to deal with the problem of Aceh, for example, or Papua, or the problem between the NU people and the people of Indonesian Communist Party. You see, there were so many bitterness, so much bitterness in the history between all these people. But we need to solve that problems by acknowledging what happened in history between us, to understand why we come into our reality today. And second, we need to treat others as fellow human beings, as brothers, understand their aspiration. So, for example, Kuster didn't see and treat the Papuan as a potential political challengers to Indonesian existence as a nation. Kuster saw them and treated them as human beings who have aspirations, legitimate aspirations. So in one dialogue, for example, when Kuster asked the Papuan people about what they want, they said they want independence, separate from Indonesia. And Kuster simply said, no, I cannot help you with that, but I can help you with other things. And Kuster even said that if you go that way, then you will go against me. That's Kuster said. But I can help you with other things. I can help you with the struggle to improve the quality of life, the actual quality of life of Papuan people. So, and then everybody can see what happens is that Kuster got the trust from the Papuan because he treated them as brothers. Now, we did this reconciliation, and this is even more relevant to our current condition in this 21st century. You see, the world is more and more going toward a single interfused civilization. We'll be living in one big community of the whole world undividedly. So in this situation, in this reality, and the reality of a single interfused civilization, we can easily understand that conflict, let alone violence, is simply not affordable anymore. Because if you let conflict, especially one that based on identity happen anywhere in the world, it can easily spread throughout the world and becoming universal conflict. It is very, very dangerous to us all. So we need to understand. That's why, I and my Nahdlatul Ulama colleagues now are working on this global movement of humanitarian Islam, because we understand, we are aware that there are elements in our history that we need to understand and find another way for a more peaceful engagement with other religions, other culture, because again we are going to live as a one big single civilization of the world. So some people may say that Gandhi was not successful because he wanted a unified Indian, not separated, undividedly. It didn't happen. As well as some people may say that Gus Dur failed because he was ousted from the presidency before he finished it. But I would say they actually succeed, because more than just all this political achievement, they actually aim something much bigger, which is future civilization. I believe that Gandhi meant to plant a seed for a future civilization that all Indians should share together, as well as Gus Dur. He also meant to plant a seed of civilization for the future of Indonesia. And I know for a fact that Gus Dur believed, and that's why I also believe that Gandhi actually had the same view. A tree depends on the seed. The tree that you can get depends on the seed that you plant. That's why Satyagraha is very, very important. Because with Satyagraha, you plant as a seed a pure virtue, so that the tree that you will get in the future would be imbued with a pure virtue. So I think this fundamental principle is very important for us to understand and practice, because we are living in a very difficult world. We cannot expect a perfect result from whatever we do, but we can still plant our seed of pure virtue. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam, Kiai. Thank you. I think it's good that you brought up Gus Dur. We really miss him. I think Gus Dur and Mahatma Gandhi may not be, they were political leaders, but they were, but more than that, they were actually statesmen. I believe that statesmen or stateswomen are currently in short supply. But the wisdoms, the legacies of the two men, I think, are very important for us to remember. Last but not least, our third panelist is Ibu Dolorosa Sinaga. She is a sculptor, a feminist icon, and a lecturer at the Institute of Kesenian Jakarta. She speaks on topics like spiritualism, crisis, solidarity, multiculturalism, and women's struggle, primarily through her artwork. But today, she has agreed to speak with us with words. We asked her to speak on how Gandhi's message on nonviolence is relevant in bringing gender equality. Ibu Dolorosa, the floor is yours. You need to unmute. Ibu Dolorosa, you need to unmute the microphone. Ibu, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy. Mr. Ambassador, my fellow panelists, thank you for having me in this event. Yes, as Andy said that I'm going to speak about Satyagraha in relation to the issue of gender and inequality. Let me read my short note so that I don't make mistake in explaining everything. I'm sorry. I'm honored to be part of this seminar to mark 151 years of Mahatma Gandhi, a great distinctive thinker and guru with profound legacy of ahimsa and satyagraha. As a sculptor, Indian culture is one of my great inspiration. I love the dance.
Ibu, the microphone, Ibu. Hello. Ibu Dolorosa, the microphone is off. No.
Hello?
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Okay. As a sculptor, as I said, Indian culture is one of my great inspiration. I love the dance. I love the music. I know Ravi Shankar, but not personally. I love the music and the richness of its sculptural tradition. Last year, before the outbreak of COVID-19, I think we met at the exhibition, Mr. Ambassador. The Jakarta Institute of the Arts were invited by the Indian Embassy to do an art exhibition to celebrate the 150 years anniversary, to mark the anniversary of India also. The participant artists of this exhibition are the lecturers of the Faculty of Fine Arts. I did not make sculpture, but I did a painting instead. It's a long practice that I have to put aside for sculpture. Mahatma Gandhi immediately come to the image of my painting, and here's I write Satyagraha and Ahimsa, and have him at the center of the painting, and also I put the red line symbolizes that his teachings and principle actually is like a fire to us, yeah, because it's very true, it's very strong, and it's like uncommon wisdom that probably we people need to learn how to live with his teachings. Okay, now my objective in this occasion is to speak of Satyagraha as a principle of resisting without violence to achieve peace as the ultimate goal. In this light, I would like to deliver a statement as my critical reflection in responding to gender issue and in equality in the light of the spirit of Mahatma Gandhi, Ahimsa Satyagraha. To me, by nature or culture, woman is the real and genuine practitioner of Satyagraha and Ahimsa. Their existence are set around nurturing, caring, educating, protecting, sheltering, and bring up life. Therefore, the women are the primary agent of the Non-Violence Act. But the position of women for thousands of years were dominated by men. The power to determine life is in their hands, including the power to determine the position and the role of woman. We already know they put women in the corner just to nurturing the baby, cleaning the house, preparing foods, and be ready in bed. Therefore, woman cannot be the head of the family or the leader of community or the leader of ethnic groups and religion. In the long run, all these conditions were reflected in their belief system. Power is very much related to violence. To put differently, an act of evidence, an act of violence requires power. The road to power essentially is to manipulate belief system or religion as political identity. Those who do not have the same belief system will be considered as enemy. The concept of Satyagraha taught us that all these conditions must be fought. So what women should do today? Occupying social and political position is important for women to achieve. But there is more important thing to deal with, since the most dangerous conflict and violence is created by religious doctrines, which determined by man's need. Then, women have to struggle to achieve the space and rights to interpret the religious text. The woman's perspective must be invested in how to read these texts of Non-Violence Act, nurturing environment and ecology, respecting others who have different belief system, ideology, races, and creating peace and harmony. I'd like to end my speech by saying this is a difficult task because it cannot be done in 1 or 2 years. It requires a lifetime endurance of all women in every corner of the world to achieve this dream. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Dolorosa. It's a very powerful statement about women taking the initiative with Satyagraha and Ahimsa. I agree with you. I think there's too much violence here because this is the man's world. I think we have more women leading the country, the nations, or leading the world. I think we'll have much more peace. Let us now turn to the discussion. Unfortunately, we have only just under 10 minutes left because of the time constraint. I'll just pick the first question that had been provided by my colleague. This one is coming from Adi Simanjuntak. He is asking, how can we disseminate the Gandhi spirit and value to the younger generation who will lead the future world in harmony? Maybe I would like to ask Professor Hilal and Kiai Yahya, maybe a short answer about how the how we can disseminate the message to the young generation.
I think, shall I?
Please do it.
Yeah. This is actually an interesting question. But this question, I think we all have to sit down and think collectively. And this is what I suggested, that there is no ready-to-use formula to implement, to spread Gandhi. I think we first have to internalize. First, we have to identify the problem which we are facing in dissemination. And in my view, there are two problems. One is that our reading culture is declining. Second is that we live in a society which is dominated by images or the moving images. So therefore, these are two things. First is that nobody is going to read. And second is that moving images are the most dominant medium of our time. So therefore, if we have to get into the world of young generation, we have to realize the power of moving images, interpret that power, and then link it to the ideas of Gandhi. So therefore, that's the first thing which I can think of at the moment. The second thing is that when we say that the Gandhi, so first we also have to have a critical attitude towards the figure called Gandhi. He, as I said in my presentation, he died long back. So what is the relevance of that? So if we have a critical view on that, the history which is given to us, we would be able to draw our own meanings. So therefore, young generation must be provided an opportunity to draw their own meaning. And for that, we have to have, we must have to understand the dominant discourse in which this young generation live. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hilal. But Kiai, I have the next question is different. It's addressed to you.
Yeah.
This is from Haza Min Fadli Robi. The question is, both Indonesia and India are facing the danger of disintegration and intense communal conflicts because of the rise of religious extremism and close-minded nationalism. The question, what can Indonesia and India learn from each other to strengthen their democracy, human rights, and national unity?
Okay, thank you. First, this problem of religious extremism is not exclusive to Indonesia nor India. It is a global phenomenon, a global problem. So firstly, we need to address it in a universal manner. We need to understand what is the universal drive for what so-called the rise of religious extremism. Like I mentioned in my speech just now, that we actually have to acknowledge the all bad historical experience that we have. Muslims and Hindus, for example, we have a very, very ugly experience in history. And we need to acknowledge that. We need to talk about that. We need to address that. And then, with that understanding, we call for all of us to go together toward the future, focus on the future, the shared well-being of our future. So that's why, for example, what we do with Nahdlatul Ulama, we conduct this global movement on humanitarian Islam, which is meant to address honestly, in a most honest way, all the problem that we have within Islam, address that and find a solution. And we have done, the step for the solution, at least partially, by, for example, having this new ruling in 2019, created by our National Convention of Ulamas in February 2019, where our ulamas made a ruling, a religious ruling, with all the theological framework, to say that the category of non-Muslim, of kafir, infidel, is no longer relevant in the context of modern nation state. That is one thing, because it is a problem, because there is a discourse within Islam to have, a division between Muslim and non-Muslims. So we address that. That's one thing. Again, is to see this as a global problem, and we need to address the problem honestly, without, trying to ignore or pretend that the problem is not exist. If the problem exists, then let's just acknowledge it and try to find the solution. And second, you see, Indonesia historically is an Indianized culture. So we have so many in common culturally within Indonesia and India. And the most important thing of the heritage, of cultural heritage, our shared cultural heritage, actually is harmonious pluralism. We have this words from Empu Tantular, which then we take it as our national creed, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, unity amidst diversity. I believe we get this view, this cultural, this philosophy from India, because it was a Hindu's religious leader who formulate that principle, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika. And it is a Sanskrit word, right? So I believe you have the same thing there in India also. This cultural, cultural instinct to have a harmonious plurality. And I think that is also what exactly Gandhi believed in and fought for, to have, to regain the harmony among the very diverse society of India. So we need to re-enlive this wisdom in our society. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kiai. We have so many questions and comments, very interesting. We only have time for one more question, unfortunately, because of the time limit. This one, I would address this to Ibu Dolorosa. This is coming from Professor Mike Hardy in London. he said one of the most powerful exhortations from Mahatma Gandhi was his reality that there is no path to peace. Peace is the path. So how do you think Gandhi would have reacted to humankind's seeming inability to default to peace rather than to conflict? Positivism is always on the back foot. Maybe this does require us to focus to women and younger people. Ibu Dolorosa, would you care to give a short answer to that? You need to unmute, please.
Thank you. I believe the spirit of Mahatma Gandhi is like a soul to everyone. So if he was asking me whether it's almost impossible to do, or I don't think I can answer that question. I mean, everyone, I think, will face the problem here and everywhere. They have conflicts. They have, conflicts that coming from the top down and horizontal. But everyone, I think, if they are strong enough to have the soul, if they have humanity, and they able to develop that potential socially and make it into a very awardable sort of meaning to life, then I believe that we can materialize the peace and harmony to the world.
Thank you, Ibu Dolorosa. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but this has been a very good, very great discussion about the legacy of Mahatma Gandhi and how we can actually tap on that legacy to ensure a much better world, peace and justice, and of course, and greater equality. Let us give a big thanks to all the panelists and Ambassador also for the keynote. And also thank you to the audience for your participation and for your comments and questions. Before we go, we'd like to take a moment to take a picture together with the Ambassador and all the panelists for screen capture. I'm going to ask Bella to take over and arrange that. Bella?
I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2, and 3. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, again, thank you, everyone. See you on our next webinar from Jakarta Post Art Close on the title Bridging the Gap in Refugee Response in Southeast Asia. In the meantime, keep yourself informed on the latest news and analysis on Indonesia through the Jakarta Post, thejakartapost.com. Thank you. Namaste. Assalamualaikum.
Namaste. Thank you.